Administrator Michael Schlein. Mike?
All right, there we go. Everybody here can hear me?
You can, but Mike, I'll also ask folks if you please mute yourself if you're not already muted. Thank you so very much. Okay, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. Good morning, everybody. Good to see everyone on here today. We're going to talk about the registration requirements for charitable organizations that solicit charitable contributions in the state of Maryland. Well, let's get started. So the law regulating charitable organizations that solicit in Maryland, it's called the Maryland Solicitations Act. It's in the Annotated Code of Maryland, Business Regulation Article Title 6, and also the Code of Maryland Regulations, Title 1, Subtitle 2, Chapter 4. And there's an image of the book there. So does my organization have to register, and if so, when, right? The biggest question, do I have to register? So a charitable organization shall register and receive a registration letter before it solicits charitable contributions in Maryland, has contributions solicited on its behalf in Maryland, or solicits charitable contributions outside of the state if the organization is located in Maryland. So any charitable solicitation in the state of Maryland or from the state of Maryland to somewhere else requires registration to solicit charitable contributions. And a frequent question we're asked, you'll see it there in bold and italics at the bottom, just having a donate button on a website. If you're located in Maryland and you have a donate button on a website, that itself is a charitable solicitation that would require registration with the Secretary of State's office. Without going too far down that rabbit hole, people go, well, what about if I'm located in Maryland, I have a donate button online, do I have to register everywhere? I mean, it really depends on the laws of every other state. We can't give an answer for that. But if you have a donate button on your website and you're located in Maryland, you do have to register with our office or any other social media platform online where you may use it to raise money. If you're located in Maryland, you're doing that online, you still have to register. That's a solicitation occurring in Maryland. And for out-of-state organizations that are contacting Marylanders online, maybe by email, follow-ups, sending newsletters online, some things of that nature where a donation is asked for, or implicitly or directly, that would also require registration. So the fact that it's online, if you're located in Maryland, you still have to register, or if you're located outside of Maryland, but contacting Marylanders even online, you still have to register.
Mike, let me just put a little footnote in here, and that is that to all of our participants, please know that the content of this presentation is for informational purposes. It is not intended to provide legal advice. So just as we continue the presentation, keep that in mind. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. So what is a charitable contribution? A charitable contribution means a contribution made on the representation that it will be used for a charitable purpose. It can include many types of payments, whether it's a payment of money or a transfer, enforceable pledge of financial help, money, credit, property, services, any gift to an organization, in that manner is a charitable contribution. But a charitable contribution under the Maryland Solicitations Act does not include these following items. It's important to know that an unsolicited gift is not considered a charitable contribution for the purpose of the registration requirements of the Maryland Solicitations Act. A government grant or government money is not a charitable contribution for the purpose of registration requirements under the Solicitations Act. Membership assessments, dues, or fines, payments for property sold or services rendered, unless that property is sold or the services are rendered in connection with a charitable solicitation, and a public safety contribution as defined in the Maryland Solicitations Act. A couple little subpoints on that. What's a public safety contribution? Maybe a donation to a fire department or FOP or some type of public safety organization, fire, police, for the use of that public safety organization and their main mission and purposes of public safety. That's a public safety contribution. Those entities don't have to register with our office for soliciting charitable contributions, because the law defines donation to a public safety organization as a public safety contribution rather than a charitable one. The other important things to think about as we talk today, but also just in general and reading any information we have in the Maryland Solicitations Act, a lot of people see these terms and they look very familiar to terms that are very similar to terms they're familiar with that they see from the IRS. And I always try to tell people, when you're reading the Maryland Solicitations Act, take it for the Maryland Solicitations Act and don't try to use some maybe common terms or familiarity. Right, government money might go in a contribution line of a form you may fill out, but under the Solicitations Act, it doesn't count towards charitable contributions, and how to calculate those. Unsolicited gifts, same thing. So just making the distinction between what a lot of folks are familiar with, which is the IRS code, versus the Maryland Solicitations Act. Think of them as two separate things as they are. We govern that Solicitations Act. So what's a charitable solicitation? A charitable solicitation is an oral written request for a charitable contribution, regardless of whether the person who makes the request receives the charitable contribution. Charitable solicitation includes many things. You see a lot written down here about what is a charitable solicitation: fundraising, drive, event, campaign, other activity, and all these other things. The things I want to highlight, though, are more towards that last bullet point: the sale of or attempt to sell an admission, advertisement, advertising space, book card, chance, coupon, device, magazine, with which an appeal for charitable contributions is made. The name of the organization is used expressly or implicitly to induce a purchase, or again is
Mike, you froze there for a minute.
am I back?
You are, yeah.
Yep. All right. So the reason I want to highlight that last bullet point and those subpoints is that under the Solicitations Act, money received from fundraising events, we're Maryland, let's say you have a fundraiser that's a crab feast or a bull roast or something to that effect, right? Popular types of events, or any other kind of fundraising event where people may even pay to get in.
So Mike froze one more time there.
Considered.
So while
Listening.
you're unfreezing, Mike, we might just want to go ahead and see if you can do it again.
All those events are considered soliciting charitable contributions, and the gross revenue from those events are considered contributions, even though paying an admission for an event, again, I'm not a tax expert, but you may not be able to write it off on your taxes because you paid to get into a fundraising event. But for the purpose of the Maryland Solicitations Act and the registration requirements, it is a charitable contribution that counts towards the registration thresholds and requirements. So fundraising events are a method of soliciting contributions. Raffles are a method of soliciting charitable contributions. I may have purchased a raffle ticket, but the gross amount from that fundraising event counts towards the registration requirements because it was sold with the charitable appeal being made.
And Mike, when you say an oral or written request, that means somebody who might call you on the phone, who might knock on your door, who might approach you outside of a store. Those are examples of oral requests, right?
Correct. Exactly. Spoken request counts the same as a written one.
Thanks, Mike.
Good point. So registration requirements. Register. Now, what do I do? How do I register? So the initial registration process and requirements, you'll notice there's a list of some items here. These are items that are required when an organization registers. And there's a few things on the list of registration requirements that are always required. And there's a few things that are required depending on certain things related to the organization. So this first set here are required items. There's always a registration statement required. Copy of articles of incorporation or other governing instruments such as bylaws or an organizational charter, some type of organizing document. The IRS tax documentation confirming tax exempt status, copy of the IRS Form 990 or 990EZ, or if an organization files neither of those, or doesn't, or files a 990N, a copy of the state forms COF 85 may be filed in place of those. So if you file a 990 or 990EZ, you give us a copy of that as part of the registration. If you don't, say maybe you file a 990N or none of the above, give us a COF 85 to complete registration. The other item that's always required is a list of board of directors. So who's on the board of the organization, where can they be contacted at, even if it's the address of the organization, that's perfectly acceptable. So there are some items that are threshold based or dependent upon whether or not they actually exist. The first one is threshold based financial review or audit requirement. If an organization receives contributions of at least $300,000 but less than $750,000, a financial review performed by an independent certified public accountant must be submitted as part of registration. So filings that are made, registration that's made is based on the organization's preceding fiscal year. So if it received $300,000 to $750,000 in its prior fiscal year that it's reporting as part of its registration, it would be required to submit a financial review. If the organization has contributions of at least $750,000, an audit performed by an independent certified public accountant would be required. The next item on the list, copy of all contracts with professional solicitors or fundraising counsels, if applicable. The organization may not have any, in which case it would check no on the registration statement, and it would not need to submit copies of contracts because they wouldn't exist. If they have contracts, you check yes on the form and submit copies of those fundraising contracts along with the organization's charitable registration. The organization would also disclose if it's affiliated with a Maryland state agency. If the answer is yes, check yes on the form, note the state agency. If the answer is no, there's nothing else to do. But if the organization is affiliated with a state agency and it has contributions of at least $750,000, so in other words, it would require an audit, would also have to submit something called an agreed upon procedures report. There are not a lot of organizations that meet that $750,000 threshold that are affiliated with state agencies. Those that are filling that agreed upon procedures report out already. And without going too far down what is affiliated with a state agency, essentially the organization set up to do the work as a nonprofit, an independent nonprofit, to do the work or help do work that a state agency does. And so essentially it's set up for the benefit of a state agency as an independent nonprofit. Simply getting a grant from a state agency does not make you affiliated with that state agency. And that's an important point or distinction to make. A lot of folks think, oh, I'm affiliated, I got grant money. Well, you ask for a grant, it doesn't necessarily make you affiliated with that agency. And the other thing that's threshold based is a registration fee. If contributions received are $25,000 or more in the fiscal year that's being reported as part of registration, the organization would owe a registration fee. That fee is a sliding scale, somewhere between $50 and $300, depending on the amount of contributions received. And charitable organizations that receive less than $25,000 a year, but use a professional solicitor, also have a $50 fee. So whereas if you're under $25,000, you ordinarily do not pay a registration fee. If you're under $25,000 but use the services of a professional solicitor, you would still owe a $50 fee.
And Mike, just for those who may not be very familiar with it, would you just explain the difference, please, between a financial review and an audit requirement?
I would trying to keep it simple and not get too technical on it. I'd say both are performed by independent certified public accountants. The difference is really in size and scope. An audit reviews financial statements and information of the organization on a deeper level. more checking, more testing involved than a financial review. The other big difference is cost, right? If the audit's more in depth, a deeper dive in the organization's financial statements and information, and so the deeper the dive, obviously the more the cost for an independent certified public accountant to do that.
Great, thanks, Mike. There's a question that popped up in the chat box. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but one is particularly related to the slide, and that is the 300,000 Maryland-only contributions for the agency contribution from across America? And of course, go ahead.
Okay. Yep. So it's 300,000 total from anywhere, not only from Maryland.
Right.
So total contributions received from anybody, anywhere.
Correct.
Not limited to Maryland only.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep. So annual registration requirements. We filed an initial registration. Now we have to file annually. What are we going to do? This list is going to look very familiar. There are certain things that you file every year for annual registration, and there are certain things that are threshold based, or you file it if you do it and you don't if you don't. This first slide are all the things you're going to file annually. An annual updated registration form. So instead of another initial registration statement, there's a shorter annual updated registration form that you file to update your registration. It has the statement where you're saying what you're giving us is true, but also update your contact information, address, mailing address, physical address, phone number, email address, all that contact information that's so important for us to have to make sure we can get in touch with the organization. Signed copy of the IRS Form 990 or 990EZ. Same thing as an initial registration. If the organization does not file a 990 or 990EZ, it would complete the COF 85 in place of that 990 or 990EZ. Same thing if the organization files a 990N with the IRS, but files a full registration with our office, it would also need to file the COF 85, which is a state form. It's 2 pages in length. It gives a more detailed financial picture so that it can satisfy the requirements of charitable registration. List of the board of directors. So an updated list of your board of directors. Current board addresses, where we can find the board members, but again, that address, that contact information can be the same as the organization if they can be located there. A current copy of the organization's articles of incorporation and or bylaws, if they have been changed since the last time they were submitted to us. So if the organization changed its articles of incorporation in the last fiscal year, it would need to send us a copy. If it didn't, there's nothing else that you give us every year. This information is due annually, or I'm sorry, there's nothing regarding your articles or bylaws that you'd give us every year, only if changes are made. This is due annually within 10.5 months, so 10 and a half months of the end of the organization's fiscal year. So say, for example, the organization's fiscal year ends December 31st, its annual registration would be due November 15th, 10 and a half months after December 31st. So making sure we're aware of that calculation. You want to get that paperwork into us in time. Other items that may be required as part of an annual registration. This list looks identical to the initial registration statement. If the organization has received $300,000 but less than $750,000 in the fiscal year that's being reported, you have to submit a financial review. If the organization has received $750,000 or more in the fiscal year being reported, it would have to submit an audit as part of its registration. Does it have contracts with professional solicitors or fundraising councils? If yes, copies of those contracts. If no, you're checking no on the annual updated registration form. There's nothing to attach. Same thing with affiliation with Maryland State Agency. If the answer is no, you're going to check no on that annual registration form. If the answer is yes, you're going to check it, write what the state agency's name is that the organization is affiliated with. And if the organization is affiliated with a state agency and receives $750,000 or more in charitable contributions, it would submit an agreed upon procedures report. That's also completed by an independent certified public accountant. And a registration fee, same thresholds, same basis as an initial registration. Under $25,000, there's no registration fee annually. unless the organization has a contract with a professional solicitor, in which case it would pay $50. 25,000 or more in contributions that are being reported, the fee is going to be somewhere between $50 and $300. The more contributions reported, the more the filing requirements, the higher the fee. We talked a lot about requirements for organizations that receive $25,000 or more in charitable contributions. What about the under $25,000 organizations? What do they have to file? Well, they don't have to file all that information. An organization that receives less than $25,000 in charitable contributions in a fiscal year only needs to file the exempt organization fundraising notice form to satisfy the requirements of the law. It needs to file a fundraising notice with our office. It's not filling out a full registration. So this 2-page form can be submitted, and there's a lot of questions. I call it the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the organization. Just getting some information so that it can file. We know the organization's out there soliciting, but it receives less than $25,000, so it doesn't have to submit the full registration. One of the questions on the form asks if the organization is a 501c3 organization, and you check yes, no, or pending. And if you check yes that the organization is a 501c3, you would also attach the IRS tax determination letter that verifies that, along with that exempt organization fundraising notice form. You check no because the organization's not a 501c3, and you check pending if the organization has submitted paperwork. So if it's applied to the IRS to get 501c3 status, but 501c3 status has not yet been granted by the IRS, you would check pending as status. You wouldn't have anything to attach at that point in time. The other item that you may have to submit as part of this filing is the 990 or 990EZ. So if an organization solicits charitable contributions in Maryland, it receives less than $25,000 in charitable contributions overall, it would submit the exempt fundraising notice. But if it does file a 990, a full 990 or 990EZ, it would attach that as part of its filing. We're not asking for the 990N. If you file the 990N, you're just going to complete this form and submit it to us, possibly with the IRS letter, possibly not, but we don't need a copy of that 990N. So these are the items that are going to be filed the first time if an organization is under 25,000 wanting to solicit in Maryland. Now, what do we do annually if we're under $25,000 per year in charitable contributions? The exempt organization fundraising notice form, again, it's the same form whether you're a first-time filer or an annual filer thereafter. The exempt organization fundraising notice form, you complete that form for the most recently completed fiscal year. You submit it to us. If the organization files a 990 or 990EZ, you send a copy. If it does not file one of those two, you don't send a copy. Again, still don't need that 990N. And we don't need the IRS letter every year either. If it's already been provided to us, then we don't need you to keep sending the same thing over and over and over. So the IRS tax determination letter isn't needed annually once we've received it the first time. So if you didn't send it to us the first year, send it to us the second year you file if you have it. And if it's still no or pending, you still check no or pending for the question on the form about being a 501c3. This information is due annually within 8 months of the end of the organization's fiscal year. So a slightly different filing cycle, 8 months for the under $25,000 organizations to get that exempt organization fundraising notice form in and complete the annual filing. There are some exemptions from charitable registration, solicitation registration, and you can apply for one of these if you do not use the services of a professional solicitor. So if you have a professional solicitor, you can't qualify for exemption. And again, a professional solicitor is different than a fundraising counsel. If you have a fundraising counsel, you can still qualify for exemption. If you have a professional solicitor, you cannot. I want to make sure that distinction is clear. If you're a religious organization, so maybe you are, standard church, mosque, synagogue, some type of religious institution where there's regular worship and that practice occurs. Those types of organizations are exempt from registering their religious organization. But if the organization is otherwise spreading the word of the moral aspects of a particular faith, it can also be exempt from solicitation registration. So it doesn't have to be that, kind of what's known as, kind of that brick and mortar religious institution that everyone's familiar with. It doesn't have to be that to qualify for exemption. It has to spread the moral and ethical aspects of a particular faith, though, and it can qualify. An organization that
So
solicits.
basically, if they're proselytizing their particular the tenets of their faith, is that what you're saying, Mike? Okay.
Exactly. It's a good way of saying it. An organization that solicits only its membership. So I have members, and the only fundraising I do is from that membership, and I don't use a professional solicitor, I can qualify for an exemption. Now, going off on a little bit of an important side note to this, though, what is a member? What is membership? A member is not somebody who simply became a member because they donated to the organization. I donate to a charity. They might like to call me a member, but I'm not a member in the eyes of our law and our regulations. I'm a member of an organization when I have a certain bona fide right or privilege or standing or honor or something that I get from being a member of that organization, along with the right to vote for board members, vote on issues for the organization, run for elected office, run for a board position of that organization. So I have to have some type of right or privilege that I'm getting out of that membership, and the ability to vote, run for office, vote for officers in that organization. If I don't have both of those things, then I'm not a member. And soliciting me is the same as soliciting anybody else. It would require registration. An organization that receives contributions from for-profit corporations and private foundations, that's determined by the IRS. So if the only money, if I'm a charitable organization, I run a charitable organization, my organization only receives charitable contributions from for-profit corporations and entities that are deemed private foundations as determined by the IRS, I can qualify for exemption. That's not a very common one that we see. On occasion, we see that. But if I'm out there raising money and those are the only two types of entities I'm receiving money from, I can qualify for an exemption. Any money from anyone else, one private donor, from the general public that gives, that's not one of those two types of entities, I'm no longer exempted. I have to register. Parent-teacher organizations or youth sports organizations that receive less than $25,000 in contributions. So we talked about the regular registration, $25,000 and up. If you have $25,000 or more and you're a parent-teacher or youth sports organization, you have to register. You have to file that paperwork. If you're a parent-teacher or a youth sports organization, but you receive less than $25,000 per year in charitable contributions, this means you do not have to give us the exempt organization fundraising notice. You don't have to give us anything if you're one of these two types of entities and you receive less than $25,000 in contributions. You are exempt from giving us anything if you're one of these two types of entities. Many of those entities still choose to register, and that's fine. But if one of these two types of entities, parent, teacher, or youth sports, and you're under $25,000 a year in charitable contributions, you don't have to give us a thing.
So Mike,
And
there's a
public-
question actually, I'm sorry.
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead.
So there's a question actually about 501c7s and whether or not they have to register. And of course, the 501c7 is a social club or recreational club.
Mentioned earlier, making a distinction between IRS definitions and the Maryland Solicitations Act, right? A 501c7 is more of a social fraternal organization. But if that C7 is raising money for a charitable purpose from the public, it would have to register. So exactly. Whether it's a C3, 4, C7, or none of the above, if it's soliciting money for a charitable purpose, it has to register with our office without going, trying to, I guess, the organization, a lot of those organizations, they may do charitable work, right? But many of those organizations are raising money only from their members for that charitable work. Those members pay or have, they have a right, privilege, or standing as a member of that organization. They can serve on the board, vote for officers, things of that nature. So a lot of those C7s, at least ones I've encountered over time, often, if they are soliciting money for a charitable purpose, qualify for that second exemption. Now, I'm not saying all C7s do. It really depends on the facts for each 501c7 out there. What are they raising money for? Who are they raising it from? Is it for a charitable purpose, or is it for the benefit of that social organization, which is not a charitable purpose? And if it's simply to benefit the C7 and there's no charitable appeal attached to that, then they're not soliciting charitable contributions. They wouldn't have to register. But if they are soliciting for a charitable purpose, there is a charitable appeal tied to that fundraising, and it's outside, they're fundraising outside of their membership for that, then they would have to register, C7 or not, C3 or not. We don't want to get too hung up on the IRS terminology, because that's not what is dictating the registration requirements. What dictates the registration requirements in the Maryland Solicitations Act are the definitions of the act of what's a charitable organization, and that's anyone that's out there soliciting charitable contributions for a charitable purpose.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. The last item on the list here, exemptions, public safety organizations that solicit contributions only for public safety purposes. So if they're out there raising money, they're your local volunteer fire department, they're raising money to support the volunteer fire department, they don't have to register under the Maryland Solicitations. Being made not related to the public safety purposes of the organization. That's the public safety organization making it. So maybe they raise money from the public at large to, I don't know, fight cancer or something like that. Maybe a member is ill with something and they want to raise money and donate it to a charitable cause. That fundraiser for that charitable appeal would require them to register, because now they're soliciting charitable contributions rather than public safety contributions as it's defined under the Maryland Solicitations Act.
Correct.
So there's some changes in the last 5 years or so that have been made to the registration requirements. The first one on this list is automatic extensions. Organizations that are under $25,000 aren't really impacted by this. So if you're filing that exempt organization fundraising notice annually, this first one doesn't really mean that much to you. But if you're an organization that files the full registration, prior to this change in the requirements, registration was due 6 months out rather than 10.5 months out from your fiscal year. So you had 6 months to get your paperwork in, and you could request multiple extensions to get to 10.5 months. Well, now you don't have to ask for the extensions. You automatically get those extensions to 10.5 months after your fiscal year ends. So you no longer have to make the request to us and then make another request to us to get additional time. You get it automatically. Audit threshold was increased. It used to be $500,000 and you had to submit an audit. The financial review threshold increased from $200,000 to $300,000. So it used to be under the law that a financial review was due at $200,000 and an audit was due at $500,000. Now that requirement is $300,000 for the review and $750 for the audit, like we talked about earlier. If you rewind 15, 20 years ago, the thresholds were only $100,000 for review and $200,000 for an audit. So trying to increase those thresholds over time to keep up with that cost of living and make sure it's a fair amount before the audit or the review is required. Board of director address requirement. There was a point in time where we required an alternative home address of board members. We do not require that anymore. We need an address for board members, but it can be the address of the organization as long as they can be contacted at that address of the organization. So no longer need board members' home addresses out there in the public's view if you can be contacted at the organization's mailing address or physical address.
So Mike, before we get into some of the questions that are in the chat box, it might be a good time to make the distinction about SSET, the State Department of Assessment and Taxations, and the Office of the Secretary of State. We often get inquiries that really we end up redirecting to the State Department of Assessment and Taxation that don't belong to us. So would you like to address some of those?
Sure. You're right. We do. It's a frequent question to us. In many states, the Secretary of State handles the corporation filings. Maryland is not one of those states where that happens. The Secretary of State's office, our office, handles the charitable solicitation registration under the Solicitations Act. Assessments and taxation, the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation, that's where you go to file articles of incorporation. So when you're forming your business entity in the state of Maryland, whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit or something in between, when you form your business entity in the state, you file your paperwork with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Frequently, organizations will reach out to us about filing articles of incorporation. We're not the place to file those. Assessments and Taxation is. And a lot of times people will reach out to us about their status. Maybe they're not in good standing with their corporation, their articles of incorporation, their corporation filings. Our office doesn't have anything to do with the not in good standing status with assessments and taxation. Those items are handled with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. So if you file your articles or you're filing something with assessments and taxation and you need to maintain that annually, you still maintain that annually with assessments and taxation. It's a completely different state agency than the Maryland Secretary of State's office, so we don't have access to those records and cannot assist with those filings.
Mike, and I think what you're saying is that it's beyond the scope of our authority, and so
Correct.
we don't have access to those files. So contacting them directly is the most sure way of getting accurate information. And then you may want to talk about how individuals can check the status of their charitable organizations and whether or not they're in compliance, and how they could check that on our website. And frankly, how donors and the public can check it on our website also.
Right. So the organization's status, their registration status with our office, with the Secretary of State's office, can be found on our website. We have a charity search page on our website where you can look it up and make sure you are in compliance, or the public can look you up and make sure you're in compliance with the annual registration requirements of the Maryland Solicitations Act. And that, if you go to sos.maryland.gov and you go into the charities section, one of the items you can select on the charities page is to search a charity from our database, and it'll give the organization's information. It'll give their name, their address. It'll give some basic financial information about the organization, and it'll also give a status about whether or not an organization is in compliance with the Maryland Solicitations Act or not. And if the organization's registration is not current, it's going to say that it's not in compliance. So it's an easy tool to check. If somebody's wondering, I sent my paperwork a month ago and I haven't seen that letter yet. If the website says you're in compliance, we're good. We probably have it. But if it's still saying you're not in compliance, you may want to double check with us, make sure we got it. Maybe it's just not processed yet. That's always possible. But I would say in general, if you send us something you haven't heard from us in a little while, always check back in. Never assume, oh, they got it, it's fine, I must have just missed it. We're going to send you a correspondence back to tell you, yes, it's good, your annual registration's complete or your new registration's complete, or we're going to tell you, we received this stuff from you, but we're missing X, Y, and Z, or it's incomplete, or something is wrong with it that needs to be corrected, whatever the situation is.
And we'll be very specific about what materials are required or documents are needed in order to complete the process. Isn't that right, Mike?
Correct. We will be specific. And I dropped the search page. It looks like one of our charity officers did as well in the chat box there. So if you're ever trying to check your organization's status, you can check it there. Or if you're a donor, right? Let's face it, some of us may work for organizations, but we may also give to some others too. And if you're ever trying to check, are they registered to solicit in Maryland? What's their status? And if they're an organization that receives $25,000 or more in contributions in a fiscal year, there's going to be a breakdown of that financial information that has to be reported, a basic breakdown of it on that search page that you can review as well.
Thanks, Mike. So we have several questions in the chat box. I'm going to ask Stephanie. Stephanie, do you mind to read the questions? And we'll ask Mike then to respond.
Oh, sure.
Please, thank you.
Let me see which ones we have not addressed yet. We have a couple religious organization related questions. Let's see. Here's one. If a religious organization not located in Maryland and is considered exempt, do they need to register in Maryland if they have a contract with a solicitor that does not solicit Maryland residents?
Ooh, great question. That's detailed.
Yes.
The short answer is no, but I'll spell that back out to make sure I have it correct and make sure that short answer is clear. Organization is religious. It would qualify for a religious exemption. However, and it's not located in Maryland. However,
Right,
it uses the services of a professional solicitor, but it does not use those services of a professional solicitor in Maryland. It would still qualify for the exemption. Again, it's the Maryland Solicitations Act, and I know we're counting contributions from anywhere, but it's about the actions and the solicitations in Maryland that require an organization to register or allow it to qualify for an exemption. So if it's not using the services of the professional solicitor in Maryland, then that's the aspect of the law that, you know, makes them still exempt, because they're not using the services of that solicitor in Maryland.
So Mike, I guess a different way of posing the question might be something like, so if you lived outside of the state of Maryland and you are raising money, whether you're a charity or professional solicitor, and I live in Maryland, and you approach me in any manner at all, by mail, by email, by direct solicitation, you're required then to register under the Maryland Solicitations Act with the state of Maryland's Office of the Secretary of State. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then if you qualify for an exemption from registration, say as a religious organization, then you could meet that requirement of being exempt, whether you're in state or out of state, as long as you're not using the services of the professional solicitor in Maryland.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully that cleared up the question. Stephanie, is there another question in there?
Yeah, there is. There's another one regarding religious schools. Does a religious school that is a 501c3 organization need to register, or only if it receives more than $750,000 in contributions? I know that's a complicated one too.
Yeah, it's not really so. It's hard to know without knowing exactly. You know, we'd have to look at. But if it's a religious school, say it's affiliated with a religious institution, that aspect is probably going to qualify for exemption. But we need to know specific details. But in general, if it's a religious school and it's affiliated with some type of religious organization, where yes, they're teaching, but they're also, one of the main tenets of that religious school is to teach the moral and ethical aspects of a particular faith, then it would still likely qualify for religious exemption. The $750,000 it has nothing to do with qualifying for exemption. So if you're exempt, whether you raised a dollar or $750,000 or $750 million. If you're exempt because you're religious, you're exempt. The $750,000 is a threshold at which an audit is due if an organization has to register. But if it's exempt from registration, then that audit would not have to be submitted because it's exempt from the annual registration and reporting requirements of the Solicitations Act. So the short answer to the one part of the question is maybe, probably. But that answer and that question have nothing to do with the 750 if the organization qualifies for the exemption. The 750 only comes into play if the organization has to register, and it brings some additional reporting requirements at that point if it has to register.
So it sounds like some additional information might be required in order to answer the specific questions of the person who put those questions in the chat box. So to those individuals you place those questions, I might ask you to email us. The email address is on the next slide with your specific organization and your specific questions so that we can answer the question directly about what your requirements are. Mike is providing overall general guidance about what ordinarily would apply. And I would advise again that the recording and the PowerPoint presentations provided today is for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be legal advice. So if you have a specific question about your organization, you're welcome to email us at the email address. Mike, that slide has advanced, so it's no longer displaying what the phone
That's
number or
weird.
email address is. Yeah.
There we go.
There you go. Thank you. So Stephanie, is there another question in there?
Let's see. Looks like everything has, Mike, if you do want to address, Bruce had asked a question about receiving contributions, I'm looking for it here, from nonprofits and private foundations. He understands that you need to be registered if you solicit charitable organizations or for charitable as well. And I had told him, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but the monies received from the nonprofit and the corporations does count as contributions received.
You're correct. Any if a private foundation or a for-profit provides money to the organization, it's a contribution. It is a charitable contribution. However, if the only money you're receiving is from a for-profit or a private foundation, then the organization's exempt from registering. They're still contributions, right? You're asking for contributions or getting them. But if you're only getting them from those two types of entities, the organization's exempt from registration. If it's getting money from another public charity, another charitable organization, it's still a contribution. And a public charity is not a private foundation or a for-profit. So that money from another public charity would be a contribution, and it would count towards any filing or registration thresholds. It's a good question. That's an important distinction to make. It's easy to kind of trip up on what makes you exempt, and it's all a contribution, right? You're still asking for the money, you're still getting it, but if only from those two sources, you may be exempt.
Okay, thank you. And then Maggie would like to know if you can speak regarding the URS, the Unified Registration Statement.
So the Unified Registration Statement, this is a form that you can find online. I don't have the link off the top of my head to give, but the Unified Registration Statement is something that organizations that register in multiple states will sometimes choose to complete the Unified Registration Statement rather than going to 10 or 20 different states and filling out their own individual registration forms. Not every state will take the Unified Registration Statement. It's up to each state. But for our sake, for Maryland, we will accept the Unified Registration Statement in place of our initial registration statement or our annual updated registration form. So if you're filing in multiple states and you're filling out the URS, you can send it to us as well for a Maryland registration, and we will accept it. Filing in multiple states can get complicated, and the URS was really designed to try to help ease some of that burden of going and getting how many different forms for how many different states. If you're really only soliciting in Maryland, if you're a local or a smaller nonprofit that's only soliciting charitable contributions in Maryland, the URS may not be a worthwhile exercise because you just come to our website, get our form. It's shorter. The Unified Registration Statement tries to take the information that's required by offices across the country, kind of put it all together and put it all in one place. So the URS is much longer than our initial registration or annual updated registration forms. So it's helpful when you're filing in multiple states. If you're only here or maybe here in one or two other places, maybe it's not as worthwhile of an endeavor to use the URS, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Mike. Mike, there are also some questions about compliance. The audience should know that on April 4th, we'll actually be having another town hall about compliance and the enforcement of charitable organizations and how to avoid complaints. The bottom line, I think, suffice to say, is that if you, as has been said already several times, if you are raising money in the state of Maryland that meets the criteria of the Maryland Solicitations Act, you're required to register with our office. Mike, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, register if you need to. Maintain that registration, file the annual registration paperwork on time. Avoid the late fee stuff, right? If you're late, you can get a late fee. And that late fee keeps growing until you get current again. So file annually when necessary. Avoid the late fees. And the other, things you talk about, call them the big three, right? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. Those are the easy ways to stay in compliance. File your paperwork and run a good clean ship. And, that goes a long way.
And if you're wondering whether or not your organization is compliant, if you're not able to find your organization on the website, then please email the DL Charity email address on the slide that will also be published on our website, or call the office that's noted on the slide, which is 410-974-5521, 410-974-5521. Again, both the email address and the phone number will be part of the slide presentation that will be posted on our website and in this recorded presentation.
Right, and I think the overall take home should always be too that we want you, still your line here, boss. So we want you to succeed, right? We want you to get registered if you need to be registered, and we want to help you get registered, and maintain that registration and stay compliant as much as we can, right? We want you to be current in your registration, and if you need to get registered, we'd like to get you registered.
Well, and that's why we have these town halls, so that we have the opportunity to respond to questions and to educate, those who are responsible for charitable organizations and help you succeed as best we can regarding the registration requirements. We're going to open it up now just for a few minutes to anyone who is still with us, who may have a question that was not entered into the chat box. If you please raise your hand. If we can see you, we will respond to the question. If we can't see you, sorry about that. We don't have any control. So are there any hands raised? Carrie Jasper, you have a hand raised?
Yes, I put a question in the box, and it said, how many different agencies must one register with if you plan to solicit charitable funds in Maryland, especially those that have less than $25,000 in contributions? And how many different forms and what forms do we have to submit?
So you're asking how many different state agencies you have to file with, or just
in Maryland? How many different agencies within Maryland do you have to file papers with? Because you mentioned tax and assessments, and you mentioned your office. Aren't there others that you have to register your organization with, or is those the only two, or are there others?
So specific to charitable solicitation, you register with our office to do that. And the forms are the ones that we went over here in the presentation, and on those different slides. If you're under $25,000, it's the exempt organization fundraising notice form, and possibly one or two more things depending on how you fill that form out and what box you're checking in which situation. Assessments and taxation, you're not filing there because you're soliciting contributions. You would file there because you're forming a business entity in the state of Maryland, or you're going to do business in the state of Maryland. So you're not filing with them because you're soliciting, you're filing with them for a different purpose. So the only place you're going to file with regards to solicitation, charitable solicitation, is our office. You're filing with assessments and taxation to form a business entity and maintain that business entity in Maryland. The one other agency that sticks out in my mind is the comptroller's office, maybe for sales and use tax exemption. which is a whole nother thing. But if you wanted to qualify for sales and use tax exemption, you can fill a form out with the comptroller's office and submit that to them. That's also a different agency than ours. We don't have anything to do with that filing. That's outside of the scope of our authority. Similar to assessments and taxation, I don't want to talk too many details on those matters for which I'm not an expert on or that I know that much about and are not under our authority. But that's the other agency that jumps out in my mind. Is it possible there's more? I mean, I guess there's possible, right? But those are the three that stick out to me for Maryland. But the only one that is specific to solicitation registration is our office.
Thank you, Mike. And again, any questions regarding other agencies should be directed directly to them because they understand the laws, the regulations that apply to them. And they are outside of the scope of our authority. I would also say that our website is very generously populated with all the information that's really needed regarding registration requirements. Ingrid, you have a hand up? You have a question?
You might be on mute, Ingrid. Ingrid?
Ingrid, if you are
Yeah, I
still
think you're on
here-
mute. I can't hear you.
Ingrid, I can't see you, so I
Maybe
don't
type
know
it
if
into
you're
the
still
chat
on
box
the
as a
call.
possibility.
Well, while we're waiting for Ingrid to respond, I'll ask if there's just anyone. We're just about at time. If there's anyone else who has a question. The GLY Menden, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to ask that, if at all our charities existing for more than 3 years and our receivable is only less than 50,000, we have to file only 990 N?
I couldn't understand.
Can you repeat that?
the question?
Yeah, you were breaking up a little.
If our charity is 3 years old and, rather 5 years old, and our receivable is only less than 50,000, can we file 990 N?
So if you're under 50,000 a year, can you file a 990 N?
Yes.
So the 990N is the filing that you submit to the IRS to maintain your probably the 501c3 status. The 990N threshold, I do believe it's 50,000, but I believe it's 50,000 in gross receipts. So that's something you file with the IRS. That's different than what you're filing under the Maryland Solicitations Act. So under the Maryland Solicitations Act, the threshold for whether you file the little form or the big form is $25,000 a year. And it's also a separate measurement. We're looking at charitable contributions as defined in the Solicitations Act. We're not looking at gross receipts. So that 990N threshold is 50,000 gross receipts or less. And the registration requirements, the full registration or the exempt fundraising notice form, the line is drawn at $25,000 in charitable contributions. So there's never going to be a reason, can't think of a reason why you would ever need to send us a copy of the 990N. It's just that little postcard. It doesn't have a lot of information on it. We don't need the 990N for anything you're going to submit under the Maryland Solicitations Act.
Thanks, Mike. Ingrid, it looks like you're back on. Do you have your question? Ingrid, we can't hear you. Are you muted, or will you please increase your volume?
Yeah, I see your question in the chat box, so Ingrid, it looks like sorry, the unmute froze. So what is Amazon Smile called for donation type? So it's about Amazon Smile, right? Yeah, okay. So Amazon Smile is one of many platforms at which you can donate money to charitable causes. So maybe you make a purchase and you also, as part of that purchase, some money goes to a charitable organization, if I remember correctly, right? And so Amazon Smile, it may, I'd have to look at their specifics. They may actually be registered as a charity. I'm not 100% sure, but there are these fundraising platforms out there that raise money for charitable purposes. Some of them are called donor advised funds. Some of them are just fundraising platforms that charities use to raise money. If it's just a fundraising platform that a charity uses to raise money, maybe like a GoFundMe, the charity is the one that's required to register. The platform itself is not. I believe Amazon Smile said they may be registered with us, or they may be more of a donor advised fund where they receive contributions and distribute them to charities that, you know, are a part of that platform. So there's some type of agreement in place usually between them and the charity to receive that money, or some kind of rules. I'd have to look at specifically how Amazon Smile is set up. I don't know off the top of my head how it's set up, but it may actually be registered as a charitable organization because it's raising money for charitable purposes. So I can't give a perfect or straight answer about it, because I know what they are, but I'm not sure exactly how that specific thing is set up.
Okay, so are there any other questions from our participants who remain online? I don't see any hands raised. Anyone on our team, Stephanie, Jasmine, do you see any hands raised that I'm not seeing that I can't
No.
see?
I
Okay.
do not.
Great, thank you.
I know someone earlier asked about GoFundMe donations
Okay,
and
you have
what they would count as.
So, I guess I accidentally touched on that a little bit in my last answer.
yeah, I think so.
GoFundMe is a fundraising platform, right? It's a tool for people and organizations to raise money for many different reasons. If an entity is on GoFundMe and they're asking for charitable contributions, they're subject to the same laws as any other entity or individual soliciting charitable contributions. And if they're soliciting charitable contributions, they'd have to register. A lot of what you see on GoFundMe is also people just trying to get money for their own personal benefits. You know, maybe somebody is really sick and they're raising money to help their family or pay their medical bills. And that, you know, if you're raising money for an individual, that's not right. That's not a charitable, sounds charitable, but it's not a charitable solicitation, right? There's not a public charitable good being done there. I'm giving money individually to somebody. I'm just doing it over this fundraising platform. That's, you know, similar in the sense that, you know, your friend's in need, and you write them a check or give them some cash for whatever it is they're in need with. It's the same concept as that, right? I didn't donate a charitable contribution to my friend. I gave somebody some money or something to use in a time of their need. So it really boils down to what's the money being raised for? Is it a charitable cause, or is it for somebody's own, you know, private use? And someone's private use is not, you know, a charitable purpose. It's for their private use. If I lend somebody money, that's not a charitable contribution. Or if I give somebody a gift, that's not a charitable contribution, right? I'm giving an individual something to use for themselves. If I give that charitable organization a gift, or if I give you a gift to be used for a charitable cause, that's a charitable contribution. But just giving someone money to give that individual money is a different concept. So.
Thanks, Mike. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today in the absence of other questions. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mike, for such a great presentation. As has been shared earlier, the recording and the PowerPoint will be posted on the Office of the Secretary of State's website under the Charities tab, and that the presentation is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended for legal advice. We have some other town halls that are coming up. Please check our website for them. I mentioned earlier the April 4th one for compliance and enforcement of charitable organizations in June. On June 20th, we'll have one professional solicitor or fundraising council registration requirements. On October 17th, donor education, online giving tips. And on November 14th, donor education for holiday donor beware that we put out an alert every year. So thank you again for joining us. Hope you have a great day. Be safe. Have a terrific day. Bye-bye now.